Good afternoon. I hope that you all can see me. And if you can do me the favor of commenting so that I know that the comments are working, you can say hi. I hope that you all are having a great day. It's a rainy day here in Greenville. So we are staying inside and hunkering down. I am not usually able to do one in the afternoon, but I'm happy that I've been able to do it today. So hopefully some of you can join me. Let's see. Hopefully I can see the comments now. So comment and let me know if you can see me, because that way I know if it's working, if my comments are working. Because my favorite part of live video is comments when y'all share. So, okay, so how has the reading been going so far? What are you thinking about Hebrews? Are you getting excited to be almost finished? Are you sad? I'm kind of a little bit sad to finish, but I love starting and ending something. Is always so fun to me, probably because I'm type A firstborn, but it's always such a fun thing for me to see something completed that I have been doing for so long, and so this is really, really exciting for me. So hopefully you all are enjoying the reading. I saw a quote that I think it was Audrey that posted by Spurgeon that I loved. I would rather lay my soul a soak in half a dozen verses all day than rinse my hands in several chapters. And that was just so perfect for the days that I'm going to cover. And even what Megan shared on Thursday is some of these days we didn't cover a whole lot of verses, but there was so much meat packed in the ones we did read that it was just fabulous. And one of the things that I think impacted me the most when I first started doing some of these studies with Kristen is she would say, eat until you're full. And I had never heard that before, and I think she got that from someone else. And if she's watching, she can maybe tell us where she got that from. I forget. I think she talks about that more in her How to Study the Bible book. But I just loved that concept, because the legalist in me wants to read and have a certain number of chapters read every day. And not that that is a bad thing, because that's wonderful. But if you're just reading, like the quote says, if you're just reading just to have said that you read it, then it's really not benefiting you a lot. But to hide it in your word, His word in your heart, is really when it comes to life. So let's jump in. I'm still not sure if my comments are working, but hopefully
to hide it in your word, His word in your.
There we go. My computer is working. Okay, so Hebrews 11, 4 through 7, day 20 is where we're going to start. Verse 4 talks about Abel's faith. Let me read that really quick. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. And that was something that I was really, I guess I'd never really seen it before, but his faith superseded his death. Even after he was gone, his faith was still speaking. And I wonder if that's, if we think about that, if we think about the fact that our lives are going to continue to speak long after we're gone. And that's something that I really want for my posterity, that I want for the people who know me. Hi, Gloria. Welcome. So glad you could come today. I want people to know that my faith was powerful, and not because it was my faith, but because the God I served is powerful. So that was something that really spoke to me in Hebrews 11:4. And then in verse 5, and y'all please feel free, hey Kristen, please feel free to jump in and tell me what you've been learning from these verses. It's not going to bother me if you skip in and out of order. Hi, I want to know how to say your name, because I don't want to say it wrong. I want to say Bonte, because that sounds fancy to me, but it may not be. I don't know if you can type it so that I know how to say it, but I think it's such a fascinating name. I love it, so I would love to know how to say it right. But I'm glad you're here. Okay, so, oh, hey Landy, welcome. So we're in Hebrews 11, verses 4 through 7 for day 20 if y'all want to turn there in your Bibles. Thank you, Kristen. I hosted a shower this weekend and they were left over, so I was using them on my wall. Bonte, I got it right. Oh, that's so fun. Bonte Fugat. Is that how you say your last name? Fugat? Now I'm going to want to know how to say your last name too. Anyway, it's such a fun name. I love it. Okay. So we're in Hebrews 11, 4 through 7. So I was talking about Abel in verse 4, but then I want to move on to verse 5. And I think maybe Megan covered some of these already, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. But I was just really struck by the fact that, a lot of times in our culture, people say if somebody passes away early, in our idea of early, they say, oh, well, they must have had some sin in their life. So... And you know what, Enoch, he didn't get taken because of sin, but because he pleased God. In verse 5, he pleased God. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. And then before he was even taken, he was commended as having pleased God. So I just always wonder, that's just such a fascinating story to me. What happened? They were just on a walk, and all of a sudden, I've heard this before, God said, it's a little bit closer to my house than yours. You want to just come to my house? And I can't even imagine. I would love to walk with God like that. Fugit. Oh, perfect. Bonte Fugit. I love that name. That's so funny that I was trying to figure that out. Anyway, I just didn't want to say it wrong. So, okay. In verse 6, and Kristen talks about this in this day as well, that without faith it's impossible to please him. God is pleased with us when we trust him. And I'm reading out of the devotional. He is pleased when we lay aside our self-sufficiency and cling to him, the Almighty One. And I don't know if that's hard for y'all, but it is really hard for me because I am not only firstborn, but I was trained to be super responsible. Even at a young age, I feel like I was kind of a mother figure to my younger siblings. And so the idea of laying aside my self-sufficiency and trusting him, that can be really hard for me. And I don't know what you all think about that, if that's been a struggle for you as well. Hi, Kim. Welcome. So, let's see. Yeah, Kristen, it's so hard to me. And I don't always know where that balance lies of... one of the things I read in one of my life application study Bible notes was, you do everything as if it depends on you while trusting him as if everything depends on him. And that can be really difficult, right? Because you don't know how much it's okay to work on your end while you are trusting him. But I think ultimately it just comes down to our attitude. Are we going to rely on our own efforts to accomplish something, or are we going to rely on prayer and on his will and seek his kingdom first? So I love verse 6, and it's pretty popular, so I'm sure you all have heard that one before. Verse 7 in Hebrews 11. By faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. What I loved about this was, I wrote, do I live in reverent fear when God warns me to stay away from someone, something, or someplace? Sometimes we just get that feeling in our gut that this is not what we're supposed to be doing or where we're supposed to be going, and that's the Holy Spirit who lives inside of us, and he's convicting us, hey, that might not be the best idea. And do I have reverent fear? Do I think, well, he'll forgive me if I make the wrong choice, or do I truly seek his will first? So that was really something that impacted me. And then also, here's kind of a question that hopefully you all can jump in on. What ark has God asked us to construct for the saving of our household? That just really struck me as I read that verse. There are certain things that the Lord has asked me to do, and I've been procrastinating or giving excuses why I shouldn't do it. But one of the things that I had noticed that I had written earlier in the year in my margin. Isn't that crazy that we're saying earlier in the year? It shouldn't be April already. I can't even believe it. But earlier this year I wrote, my inheritance is health. And that's kind of ironic because I've been pretty much sick all year. But as far as making healthy eating choices and being active, that's something that I had just always made an excuse about, that I didn't have time for it or where it wasn't important. And for the saving of my household, like especially now that I have a daughter, I'm the one that does the cooking. I'm the one that does the shopping. And so I get to make choices about how our family is going to eat and whether we're going to be healthy or not. And that may not just show up in weight. It may show up in, blood work and tests. And I've had some of that done recently. And so your arc may be different, but the Lord may ask you to construct something and you think, there is no way, or, I don't even know what he's talking about. I don't even, the ark, what is rain? Noah didn't even know what rain was. And so the Lord may ask you to do something and you feel like that nudge to go start a ministry or to go reach out to somebody and ask them if, they can mentor you or find someone that you can disciple. And it just seems maybe hard, but that could be something that saves your household later. Like, you never know when the Lord is asking you to do something that's going to affect more than just you. And so I think it's really important and crucial that we pay attention to those things. Megan, my devotions, being consistent in God's word. Yeah, that's a really good one. How is that gonna impact your family in huge ways? It will affect your relationship with your husband and with your children and with your mother-in-law, and there's just so many things. Bonte agrees with you, Megan. I feel like that is such a crucial thing that's really going to play out in your faith, and your family is going to see how. Oh, and hopefully, I just had this thought. Hopefully, Landy won't think I'm telling on her, but she said that her son could tell when she hadn't been with the Lord. And I hope that my children can tell when I haven't been with the Lord. I hope that they know that it's not just a bad day. I hope they know that it's because that when I spend time with God in the Word, that it completely changes my attitude. It changes my mental perspective. It changes everything about my day. And so anything else from chapter 11, verses 4 through 7? We talked about what self-sufficiency do we need to lay aside? What areas are we kind of doing things in our own strength and not relying on the Lord? One of the other things for the saving of my household was routines that help our sleep schedules and helps us not be as moody. And so that's been really good for me to kind of establish those now that my daughter is getting old enough to almost have a nap schedule. So, and those are just practical things. Those are not even, things like Megan said, like being in the Word or discipling someone or getting a mentor, walking alongside someone in their journey. And we've often talked about, one of the things that my husband told me when we first got married was he would stop and help anybody on the side of the road. If they blew out a tire or if they needed a he would almost stop and pick up a hitchhiker kind of thing. And it used to scare me to death. And he said, here's the thing. You never know when you're going to be on the side of the road. And you're going to need someone to stop and help you. And that wasn't the only reason why he was doing it, because he just loves to help people. But I thought, we don't even realize there have been people that I've poured into in the past and have seen no fruit and gotten kind of frustrated, and then maybe we've moved aside, we've moved apart in our relationship, and then that person resurfaces in my life, and all of a sudden they are such a huge blessing in my life. And so you never really know. And here's a personal example. I reached out to a lady that I really didn't know at all, and I knew that she already had 4 kids of her own, and she was fostering 2 extra kids. And so I just offered to go over and do free sitting for her once a week for a couple hours. She was taking all 6 kids to basketball practice for like 2 kids to play. And so I said, why don't you just let me come over every Wednesday afternoon for a couple hours and help? Well, for a while, that was all I did. I wasn't getting paid. I wasn't, she was thankful, but it kind of got hard after a while. Like, I don't know how much longer basketball season's going to last. Like, I miss my Wednesday afternoons. And now she has been such a huge blessing in my life. She gives me clothes that she outgrows. She gave me an Applebee's gift card one time that had like $10 left on it. And she does photography, and so she's done pictures for us. And when she comes just as a friend to our birthday party, she brings her camera and she takes pictures. And so it's just such a huge blessing. Like, you don't know who you pour into, who the Lord's maybe asking you to be generous with, and you think, well, they don't have anything to give back to me. And they may not. And that's probably the purpose of it. But it may come back later to bless you. So let's move on to Hebrews 11, 8 through 12. That's day 2. I'm sorry, day 21, not day 2. Okay, so here's my question for this day. What place or position has God called you to that may seem unfamiliar or uncomfortable that He will give to you as an inheritance if you obey? Has the Lord given you any promise of an inheritance that you can claim? So an example that I thought of would be committing to sponsor a compassion child, but not really sure where your finances are going to come from to do that. Or like my friend, she chose to foster, not knowing where they were going to get an extra bed, or how it was going to affect her other children. And so, just Abraham's faith, and I think Megan covered this too on Thursday, but even just Abraham's faith of, I cannot imagine God calling me to go somewhere and me having no idea where I'm going, and I just start walking, because hopefully He'll tell me when I get there. And then in verse 8, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. He went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. And when we picture the promised land, what do you picture? I don't picture them living in tents. Like, I don't remember that being part of the plan. I was thinking like, a castle, or at least a building of sorts, not just a tent. That's probably not the vision that Abraham had of the promised land. And sometimes our promises don't appear to be fulfilled. I mean, and we can give testimony to that. There are times when the Lord has promised us things in His Word, and then they just don't seem to be coming to pass. Or it takes longer than we anticipate. So he could live in a foreign land, and the reason why, did y'all catch that? Oh, you probably didn't catch it because we didn't read it yet. But in verse 10, you may have already read it and caught it the first time you read it. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. So he could live in a foreign land because he was looking to heaven. So what places has God called us to be where we're feeling uncomfortable, we feel like things are unfamiliar, they're not our comfort zone, but that's where God's called us, and we just trust Him that He's going to take care of us because we've put heaven in front of us. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. I think it's in chapter 12, about what we're keeping in front of us, and the motive and the I can't think of the right word, but the reason why we do what we do is not just because we believe God, but also because we have kept a good thing in our vision. And so He kept heaven in sight, and He knew, what? Tents are no big deal. I can live in tents because one day I'm going to live in heaven. Let's see. Let me look at my comments. Gloria said, oh, yeah, Gloria, I'll just be honest with you. I had even gotten to a place of bitterness because I felt like I was helping so much, and there would be times I'd be like, I'll give you 2 hours, and then it would be 4 hours, and I just remember that was super hard. And she was really sweet about it. She said, if you ever want me to start paying you, let me know. And I just thought, well, that's, I don't want to be like, yeah, I'm ready to get paid now. So I let it go on a little bit too long and got bitter. But then the Lord showed me how I'm so amazed. She brings me her leftovers because they've got a big family, and if they have 2 steaks left over, she'll bring them to my house. And it's turned into the sweetest friendship, and she's one of my prayer partners now. And so you just never know when the Lord is going to use someone in the future to help you. So thank you. You're very kind. Megan said that her entire move to Kentucky felt like an unfamiliar place. She had never lived anywhere else before. That was probably really hard, Megan. I mean, you're leaving your family and your community behind, and maybe your grocery store that you loved. I mean, that's really hard. I think I'm still kind of learning how to navigate my way through Greenville, but I can't imagine going to a new place and having to start all over, being uprooted. That's a really great illustration of that. And you even knew where you were going. God told you, but I can't imagine leaving behind and having to look for a new church and new doctors and new like I said, grocery stores. And I don't know about y'all, but it takes me forever when they change stores around, when they rearrange the store for me to find anything. I can't imagine trying to go to a new store. So that's a really, really great example. I'm glad you brought that up, Megan. It's hard. I'm so glad you've been able to find a good church family. That has been probably the biggest struggle in our marriage. Target. I love it. Hey, there you go. Oh, you had to give it up. I thought you said you moved up to Target. I was like, well, that's not too shabby. Oh man, I don't have a Target here either. And that's so sad. The hardest thing in our marriage has been church shopping, if you will. So that's hard when you leave a really good one. But I'm really thankful that you've been able to find a good one. And that's also where I think you have your discipleship group now. So it's awesome that you're getting involved. I love that. That's so good. Okay. So in verse 12, let's move on to that verse. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. So what prayers have you prayed that seem impossible? Basically, as good as dead. Are you praying for family reconciliation? Are you praying for the salvation of someone that is near and dear to your heart? Are you praying for health? I think there was somebody in one of the videos that Megan did that said that she was praying for the health of one of her friends. That's just so hard. But look what God did from one man. From just one man. It says, descendants were born as many as the stars of heaven and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. And even the fact that he only had one, he had Ishmael, but Isaac was the promised son. God was going to make him a huge nation from one son, just one. I mean, it's not even like Job. Even Job had more kids than that. And they all died, and then he got as many back as he had before, or twice as many, I think, maybe. But he had one son, and God said, I can do this with one. I don't need a huge army. And I think about Gideon and how the Lord kept paring down his army so that he would know that he wasn't winning because of their efforts and their mighty arms. It was because of him. And so I often wonder how we underestimate ourselves. We undercut ourselves and think, I couldn't really make a difference for God because I'm just one person. But we can, because God did it with one person, and he was as good as dead. So if you are not 90 years old or 100 years old, you're probably even better than that. You're better than close to death. So God can do it with just one person. And I love, it reminded me of the quote, and I can't remember who it's by, but the world has yet to see what God can do with a man fully surrendered to God. And then he said, by grace, I'll be that man. So can we be women? Can we be the women who are willing to say, I'll be by myself. I'll be alone. I will do this because God's called me to do it. And even if I don't have a following, and even if people make fun of me, I will do this. Any more comments or questions? Y'all feel free. There is a little bit of a delay, so it might take me a minute for it to pop up, but I will respond to it. Okay, let's move on to Hebrews 11:13 through 19. That was day 22. 13? Was it 13 or was it 17? Let me look. Okay, well, day 21 was 8 through 12, so let's do 11:13 through 19. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. So what struck me in verse 13 was that they were rewarded for their faith in the promise without even having received it. And so even just having faith in the promise, even if you don't have it in your hands, just having that faith that God is going to give you the promise, he rewards that faith. And so in verse 15, one thing that really jumped out at me is, it said, if they had been thinking of a land from which they had gone out, what are we thinking about? Because it will affect our actions. And notice what he says, if they had been thinking about that, they would have had opportunity to return. So what am I thinking about? Am I looking back to my past? Am I thinking about my fears and my anxieties and my insecurities? Am I rehashing the mistakes that I've made over and over again? Well, I will repeat this, and I will have opportunity to return if I dwell there. It's so important for our thoughts to be centered on the Lord, and like we said earlier, focused on heaven, because that is our eternal glory, and we can face just about anything. I think Paul says nothing, no sufferings here are worthy to be compared with the glory that will be revealed in us. But how we think affects so much about our actions, and I just find that verse to be so fascinating, that if they'd been thinking of that land, they would have had the opportunity to return there. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. So what is better? I mean, my fears are heaven. My shortcomings are his sovereignty. Me or God, my plans versus his plans. What is better? Obviously, God's plans are better. I often think mine are, but his plans are better. And then verse 16 is just so precious. The last part, therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. I looked up the antonym for the word ashamed, and it's, you may have already thought of this yourself, but it's proud. God is proud of me, and he claims me, and that's just so special to me. And for anyone who has had any, maybe your father wasn't, maybe he was absent, or maybe he's passed away, or maybe you have a disjointed relationship with your father, it says that he is proud of us, and he is not ashamed to be called their God. So that's just really a sweet thought. Verse 17, let me read that. By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son. And then into 18, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. I love how they throw that in there. They're just reminding us, in case we forgot, that this was the promised son that was going to bring descendants to Abraham, and God was asking him to give it up after he promised it. This story has always been such a baffling story for me. It has taken me so long to really grasp what's going on in this story. And why would God tell him to murder? Because he says don't murder. And when it comes down to it, and I think this has been discussed in past videos too, but it wasn't as much about what he wanted him to do to Isaac as it was about, are you willing to give up your dreams and the things that you consider precious in order to put me first in your life? And I think that when what Isaac has God asked you to put on the altar? And Isaac's not a bad thing. Number one, because he was a child, and children are not bad things. But secondly, because God had promised him this child. He had promised him that he was going to give him descendants because of this child. So sometimes those things that God might be asking you to give up are not bad things. They may just be things that are taking your attention, your affection away from him. So I wrote, we often think of like burning bad music or clothing. But this wasn't something that God was asking him to put on the altar because it was bad or was detrimental. It was just because it was taking God's place in Abraham's life. And we've heard it said that the good is the enemy of the best. And Isaac was good, but God was better. Uh-oh, I see that my connection is a little bit funky right now. Let's see if I can fix it. Okay, Megan said, something I wrote in the margin regarding faith. You always have an option to trust or settle. Oh, that's good. Trust for the future or settle for the present. I love that, Megan. That's really good. I might steal that from my margin. Yes, absolutely. Hebrews 11 is a work of art. I mean, it is like the most incredible chapter. And how many different names and stories, and I love that God keeps track of that. And that sounds silly because we know God knows everything, but he has not forgotten. And this chapter is full of like people who did great, amazing things and people who did hardly anything. Not hardly anything, but like not big things that we would consider to be something you'd be rewarded for. So that's just been an encouragement to me that I don't have to do something major for the Lord in order to receive reward for my faith. Okay, so we talked about things that are replacing God in your heart. Let's go through verses 20 through 40. And I wanted to just ask as we end Hebrews 11, who is your favorite Hebrews 11 character? I think it was Rebecca, or maybe you're a double name and you go by Rebecca Joy. You can let me know. But she was just talking about how she loved all the different people in this chapter, and I do too. Verse 26, I loved. Moses considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking for the reward. I thought that was awesome. And then verse 31, speaking of people who didn't necessarily, kill any Goliaths, you have Rahab in verse 31. By faith, Rahab the prostitute. And I love how they always tack that on there. They're just reminding you who she came from, where she came from, who she was. She did not perish with those who were disobedient. Why? Because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. So let's go back to our hospitality chat. Like, who are we entertaining and we don't even realize, maybe at the time, the great impact that we're having on future generations. I'm sure that she didn't realize when she welcomed the spies that she was going to be saved from death, but she thought it was worth a risk, worth a try. So be friendly. That's what you got out of Hebrews 11. Give a friendly welcome. I love that. Okay, so one of the other things, I think it was Shelby pointed out, she wrote one day, when you take away all the questions and the whys, you remove the element of faith. And I think just to sum up chapter 11, I love that because, we believe in things that we see easily, but then it's not faith. And so if we're going to believe in something and have faith, we need to obviously not be able to answer all the questions that we have and all the whys that we have. So my encouragement would be don't get discouraged when there's not a lot of when there are a lot of questions that you can't answer, and when there's a lot of whys and you don't have it all figured out, because we're not God, and that's okay, and we don't want to be. So just to rest in that he knows the answer, and we don't have to know. Let's move into chapter 12. We're going to wrap it up really quickly here. One thing that Cheryl said was the control weight. She wanted to lay aside the control weight, and I so self-identify with that because the weights can be really heavy sometimes, especially when you need to control things. So my question from verse 1, what weights have you found to hold you down and hold you back? Another one of mine was guilt. Constantly felt guilt about everything. But God has not given us, he says that condemnation is not from him. So I can give that up. I can give that weight up. But I just find these verses to be really convicting. And so I'm just going to ask you to think on that this week about what weights you need to lay aside and what sin clings closely to you and you're not able to run as well because of those things that are holding you back and down. And then in verse 2, how do we drop our weights? We look to Jesus. He is how we get rid of all those extra weights. Megan says worry. Worry is a big one. Anxiety, worry, all of those go together. And just wondering what God's plan is. So that's a really good one. And looking to Jesus, I mean, even using worry as an example, how do we look to Jesus to conquer our worry and our fear and our anxiety, we do that by remembering that he has it under control. Going back to the control thing. He has it under control. We don't. And in Matthew 11:28 and 30, he even talks about casting your care on me, for I'm sorry, that's in a different verse. That's a good one too, but come to me all who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So we can cast our worries and our anxieties and fears and our control issues and all those things on the Lord. And so the thing that just really strikes me about this verse is that Jesus had joy set before him. He was going to the cross. He was suffering far more than most of us will ever suffer in our whole life. But the joy that he was going to be uniting us with the Father was enough. And having that set before him, he was able to accomplish his mission. And so I told you we were going to come kind of full circle with that. What we're thinking about, what we're setting our mind and our focus on, that is what is going to make the hugest difference in whether we can finish the work and the task that's in front of us. In verse 3, we will face hostility in this life, but we can remind ourselves of Jesus. He is our encouragement not to grow weary and faint-hearted. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. I love that. Then verses 5 through 13, he's talking about discipline, which is nobody's favorite topic. But because he is exhorting us as sons, and that's how he starts out. I'm trying to find out where that verse is. He exhorts us as sons. Oh, verse 5. Have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? So we are sons and daughters of Christ. That means that when we're disciplined, we should be reminded of whose we are. Discipline is nothing less than loving. He loves us too much to let us get lost, to let us wander. And so then it goes on to talk about lift up the drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees. And then at the end, so rather be healed. So accepting his discipline is accepting his healing. That I'd never really paid attention to that before, but that's a really cool concept that I gathered this time. In verse 10, he talks about discipline being for our good and so that we may share his holiness. Is there any motive greater than that? To share Christ's holiness? And that discipline is not just because he's mad at us, and rightly so, because we're sheep and we probably drive him crazy, but because it's for our good. He disciplines us so that we can be better people. I just love that part. And so then verse 15, see to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. So I was evaluating if there was any bitterness tucked away anywhere, and I was reading in one of my commentaries by Warren Wiersbe, and he talks about these verses here, and I just wanted to read this to you. He says, what sins will rob us of the enabling of God's grace? These verses tell us: lack of spiritual diligence, bitterness against others, sexual immorality, and living for the world and the flesh. Some people have the idea that a profane person is blasphemous and filthy, but Esau was a congenial fellow, a good hunter, and a man who loved his father. He would have made a fine neighbor, but he was not interested in the things of God. God's grace does not fail, but we can fail to depend on God's grace. Esau is a It spoke from the earth and lost my place. Spoke from the earth, and it was calling for justice, but Christ's blood speaks from heaven and announces mercy for sinners. So I love that part, that he is better than Abel. That goes back to that sermon series that I referenced earlier in another video about he is the good and better Abel. God will never allow his children to sin successfully. Oh, that's a good one. I love that. He will convict. Oh, that's so good, Megan. Thank you for sharing that. I love that. Spurgeon, he's been already involved in our study a lot today. Okay, so just as we're wrapping up, verse 26 talks about, yet once more I will shake not only the earth but also the heavens. And this comes from Haggai 2:6, which I'm going to read to you really quick. I'd never looked up this cross-reference before, but for thus says the Lord of hosts, yet once more in a little while I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. So the reason why he talks about that is just, the Lord is going to come back, and he's going to bring his glory with him. And until that time happens, our world's going to be shaken. Our earth is going to be turned upside down, because that's his plan. Because things are going to continue to get less stable. And that's going to be really frightening for Christians, probably. But honestly, that is just proof. That's proof of what he is doing in the world. He does not want us to get comfortable, because this world is not our home. And as we saw in Hebrews 11, we're looking for a greater home. And then in verses 27 through 28, I just love the yet once more. Yet once more. I'm just reminding you, in case you're forgetting, I'm just going to continue to remind you and continue to remind you. Gloria, we are in the end of chapter 12. I'm sorry, the earlier one was Haggai 2:6, if that's what you were asking about. Haggai 2:6 was the cross-reference for verses 27 and 28, or 26 and 27 of Hebrews 12. Bonte says, I love that his grace does not correlate to our sin. Even though we sin, his grace is bigger. Yes. Okay, Gloria, good. I'm glad that answered your question. Yes, Bonte, I feel like that's so crucial to me, that his grace is bigger than anything I will ever face. Bigger than my sin, bigger than my mess-ups. He's not just like, well, I'll just give you a little bit of grace because you've done so much sinning. But it covers all of it. And then I think there was a comment by Nikki on the Lamp and Light page that talked about worship not just being a song we sing, but being our lives. And so I just thought that was such a great way to end with verse 28 here. Let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. No matter how insecure we feel in this world, we cannot be shaken. And thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. He's big, y'all. We may never understand how big he is, but he is big, and he consumes, and he will not be misplaced in his loving kindness. He will not. I hope that you found these chapters to be really encouraging to you. They've been encouraging to me. Let me just pray for us really quick, and then I'll let you go. I know I've gone a little bit over, but I thank you for joining me in the middle of the day. Fun little lunch break for me. Lord, thanks so much for these women. Thank you for your word and for our time together here. And I pray that the things that we've read will seep deep into our hearts and change us from the inside out. I pray that we would worship you in the reverence and awe that you deserve, and in worship that is acceptable to you. Give us more faith to believe in the things that you've promised to us and to claim the promise, and that we would keep Jesus and heaven in front of us when we lose our faith, so that we can remember the reason why we are doing what we're doing, because you've asked us to do them, and you are all that matters. And we love you and thank you for what you're going to do in our lives. Amen. Thank you all. You all have a wonderful day.